Gardner has written extensively on the relationship between federalism and police administration and is developing a separate line of research regarding disparate African-American perspectives on police reform. His scholarship has appeared in the Columbia Law Review, the Boston University Law Review, and the Florida State University Law Review. Gardner graduated from Harvard Law School in 2003 after serving as co-editor-in-chief of the Harvard Black Letter Law Journal. He went on to work in the trial division of the District of Columbia Public Defender's Service, litigating juvenile and adult cases from presentation through deposition. After leaving criminal practice for academia, Gardner earned his master's and doctoral degrees in sociology at the University of California, Berkeley. His academic positions are as follows: Washington University in St. Louis, School of Law, and Associate Professor of Law to the present. Affiliated faculty, Department of Sociology, University of Washington School of Law in Seattle, Washington, Assistant Professor of Law from 2016 to 2019. You'll notice he switched from University of Washington to the Washington University. New York University School of Law, NYU and New York Faculty Fellow, 2014 to 16. So his education is Harvard Law School, 2003, JD, MA-JD, University of California, College of Letters and Sciences in Berkeley, his PhD in sociology, and in which he wrote, or at which he wrote a dissertation entitled The Safest Place, Immigrant Sanctuary in the Homeland Security Era. He also attended the University of Michigan, College of Literature, Science, and Arts in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and graduated there with a BA with high distinction in sociology in May of '99. Now, he has publications that are forthcoming, and he has publications already out there. I'll mention a few to you because there are many. The Ephemeral Criminal Record, a practical project in penal abolition in race, racism, and the law is forthcoming. The Race, Innocence, Power Theorem towards the demystification of community policing, that's forthcoming. But already published is Police Violence and the African American Habitus in 2020. Immigrant Sanctuary as the Old Normal, A Brief History of Police Federalism, 2019. Right at Home, Modeling Sub-Federal Resistance as Criminal Justice Reform, that is in 2019. And he wrote also on crime policy and federalism in America, and in an encyclopedia 2018. The Promise and Peril of the Anti-Commandeering Rule in the Homeland Security Era, Immigrant Sanctuary as an Illustrative Case. And there's a special issue on the New Civil War, 2015. He also wrote on racial profiling as collective definition and social inclusion. He also wrote on the CAP effect, racial profiling in the ICE Criminal Alien Program, the Chief Justice Earl Warren Institute on Law and Social Policy at the Berkeley Law Center, 2009. The Political Delinquent, Crime, Deviance, and Resistance in Black America. And he has some working papers on criminal nationalism in the Federal Society, also rethinking police diversity, and race as explanandum. His professional affiliations are the Law and Society Association of Jotwell Legal Blog. He's a contributing deputy editor. He's also part of the American Sociological Association, and also the Washington, D.C. Bar Association. Gardner has a wide experience. He has worked in the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia in Washington. He's been a staff attorney, litigated criminal cases from arraignment to deposition in the juvenile and general felony divisions of PDS from 2003 to 2006. He also led counsel in 3 jury trials and 6 bench trials. Alongside all of this, Gardner has been involved heavily in organizations and presentations at various national symposiums and association meetings. I will lift a few out of here, and he has presented on police violence and the African-American habitus that was presented at the Boston Law Review. The Trouble with Police Diversity, a paper presented at a colloquium at Duke University. The like paper also presented at the Justice Roundtable in New Haven, Connecticut. He also presented a brief history of police federalism at UC Berkeley. He also presented at the Vanderbilt Law Criminal Justice Roundtable, also at the William and Lee School of Law. He also presented at the Brigham Young University School of Law, and also the Law Society Association's annual meeting in Mexico City. He has been around, he knows this topic, he's entrenched in it. He has done so many presentations of relevant papers in the Utah College of Law, in Salt Lake City, the Law and Society annual meeting in New Orleans. You name it, he has done it. And yet he is one of the younger professionals in our nation, but probably a leading one in this area of law enforcement, justice, and criminal law, and as it deals with the policing. I am excited to present to you this evening Trevor Gardner II, and now I ask you to hear him. I will turn over the time to him, and I ask for your keen attention so you can ask relevant questions at the end of his presentations. Dr. Gardner, you're on. Is he unmuted?
Dr. Gardner, I believe you need to unmute yourself.
He just
did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to thank Uncle Newton for that grand introduction. Very generous. I will say that it's my profound disappointment that my wife was not able to hear the introduction. I think she would have been proud of me and had a better sense of what I've been up to all these years. But apart from that, let me just say thank you. Thank you to Dr. Hoyle, who I know as Uncle Newts, to the Lehigh Church family for giving me this space to talk a little bit about criminal justice, police, punishment, and the state of Black America as it relates to criminal punishment in the US. And I want to say thanks to my in-laws who are on this Zoom platform. I don't know if they are able to say hello, but they signed on, and I promised to give them a shout out before jumping into my presentation. With that, let's get into the presentation formally. So I'm here to talk to you, as I mentioned before, about criminal justice in the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about punishment, criminal punishment in the US. We'll talk about police, and we'll talk about race-based policing. I'll end by giving a humble recommendation on how we might counteract the problem of race-based policing in the US. And then I'll just make a small point about our collective work against what we might call race-based policing, racist policing, and how our work against this problem might speak to our Christian walk, our commitment as Christians to a more equal society. So with that, let me open up with a basic question. Why punish? What is punishment? What do we think of when we talk about criminal punishment in the U.S. specifically? No one likes to talk about criminal punishment, for casual reasons. No one wants to talk about punishment because they think it's a fun topic. It's a dark topic. It's fairly grim. But in the U.S., punishment is something that we need to understand thoroughly, in part because it is so intimately connected with the life of minorities in this country, right? There's a very strong, intimate relationship between criminal punishment in the U.S. and racial identity, specifically African American and Latino racial identity. But before we talk about the relevance of race, let's talk a little bit about the history of punishment in the U.S. So for hundreds of years now, I would say at least 400 years, there have been four prominent theories of punishment in civil society. One being retribution, a second being deterrence, a third rehabilitation, and finally incapacitation. What do we mean by retribution? Well, this is fairly simple. This boils down to the concept of revenge, right? Society is getting revenge for the violation of its moral code, of its moral rules. The person who violated the criminal law is getting what's often called in criminal law the just deserts, right? They're getting exactly what they deserved because of their transgression. When we talk about deterrence, this is a little bit different. We're talking about punishment because we feel as though it sends a message to society that this should not be done. If you commit this particular crime, we are going to punish you. So we're trying to prevent future crime by punishing the person who committed this crime, right? So this is the theory of deterrence. Third, rehabilitation. We're all familiar with this word. This concept, we can help people develop as individuals to mature through the process of punishment. And then finally, we have incapacitation. What do we mean by incapacitation? We simply want to put that person in the confines of a jail or prison to make sure they don't hurt anybody else, to make sure they don't continue to criminally offend. We want to isolate that person such that during their period of isolation, they can no longer commit harms, right? These are the four primary purposes of punishment. They're the primary purposes that are articulated even today. But I want to submit to you this evening that we, as an American society, have gravitated toward retribution. Retribution, the top justification, the top theory we see in this list of four theories. We are principally interested in American society in the notion of payback. We like how it feels. This is our sensibility, our primary sensibility when it comes to contemporary punishment. All right, so we know ostensibly why we punish as a society. Let's talk a little bit about what things look like on the other end, right? So we're not talking now about justifications for punishment. We're going to talk a moment about outcomes. What does punishment look like on a grand scale in American society? So here we see punishment rates across the globe, across the entire world. As you can see at the very bottom, we have the Nordic countries, Finland, Norway, Denmark. They're incarcerating around 58, we see 72, 73 people per 100,000. So just to be clear, that means for every 100,000 people in Finland, 58 people are presently incarcerated. Let's go all the way to the top. Which country is at the top? Country we all live in presently. The United States of America punishes just about more people than any other nation in the country. And it's not because America is a big country. This is a rate, right? So we're talking specifically about the number of Americans per 100,000 who are incarcerated. 707 per 100,000. The next closest country is Russia, then the Ukraine, then Poland. We incarcerate by far more than these countries, and we're not even close to countries who are, let's say, Western industrialized countries. We look a bit more like the autocratic countries like Russia and China, but we still come in first place. We get the blue ribbon on planet Earth for our incarceration rates. So let me just offer a poll right now. I don't know how many of you have engaged in Zoom polling, but I'm going to poll the room with a couple questions just to get some feedback from you before we move any further. So this question is fairly simple. Have you heard of the term mass incarceration? You should have a box that pops up on your Zoom platform. You can say yes, you can say no. Those are the two options. I want to get a sense of where we are in terms of our understanding of this particular topic. Have you heard of mass incarceration? If you could answer quickly, I'll close the poll in the next 10 seconds or so. Simple yes or no question. And we'll close the Zoom polling. We have about 35 rooms answering. Most of you have heard of the term mass incarceration. So Ashley, I'll reach out to you at this point. What does that mean, mass incarceration as a concept? What does that concept mean to you?
Well, from my understanding, I understand the term mass incarceration to mean specifically targeting a group for punishment, or as it says, incarceration. So when we say mass incarceration in the Black community, it's specifically targeting Black and brown folks for jail time.
Okay, so that's very helpful. Thank you. So when we're talking about incarceration, we're talking specifically about putting someone either in jail or in prison. Okay, either in jail or in prison. Jails are local. Prisons are facilities that typically you'll find in rural areas, and people who are in prison are spending more than a year under incarceration, under lock and key. How many people do you all suspect are currently living under lock and key in our societies? This is the second of 3 polling questions. How many people do you suspect are living under lock and key in our society? So again, if you could answer quickly, we'll give you the polling results and move forward. But I'm just curious as to, you know, what our general sense is of this issue of incarceration in the U.S. We have about 30 answers, and let's end the poll. So most of you answered 2 million, a few 1 million, and then we have 7 who answered in the area of 100,000 to 500,000. So those of you that answered 2 million, you're correct. 2 million people in jail and prison in the US, right? We have in the US 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population. Again, as I mentioned before, that's more than any autocratic, that's a higher percentage than any autocratic nation in the country, and also a higher raw number than any other country in the nation. And as you mentioned, Ashley, many of these individuals who are incarcerated in the United States are Black and brown. Something to remember going forward. I'll touch on that in just a bit. I want to give you a sense of what this looks like historically. How did we get here, or what's the timeline by which we entered this moment? So this is a graph showing you the incarceration rate in the United States between 1925 and 2012, right? In 1925, or during this entire period, as you see from the graph, between 1925 and 1972, we incarcerated 110 people per 100,000 in the US. So this is talking again about everybody who's living either in a jail or prison in the US, in the United States. Up until 1975, we had a fairly stable rate of incarceration. And criminologists like myself said that this was sort of a natural rate of incarceration in the United States. We shouldn't expect it to go up. We shouldn't expect it to go down. This is sort of based on sort of structural elements in American society. But as we see in 1972, around 1975 actually, the incarceration did go up. It went up dramatically. I was born in 1977. I promised my mom I wouldn't reveal that information, but I think it's very important for context. Over the course of my lifetime, we've seen this spike in incarceration rates, right? So the growth of incarceration has largely occurred over the last 40 years. The rate of growth has slowed a bit in recent years, but we still incarcerate a lot of people in this country, about 767, as I mentioned, per 100,000. A little bit more contextual information. I think this is quite important. So here I want to present to you a slide that addresses this issue of minorities, minority men in particular. So if you look at the chart, the first section of the chart, the top half, addresses men, white men and black men in terms of incarceration. So this is a chart that does capture the probability of incarceration over one's lifetime if you were born between 1965, and 1969. So these are folks that are a little bit older than I am. But as you can see, when we're talking about white men, their likelihood of incarceration, or I should say the rate of incarceration, is about 3%, right? 3 in 100 white men are going to be incarcerated over the course of their lifetime if they were born in this time interval between 1965 and 1969. And I said over their lifetime. It's actually, by 1999. Okay, 22.4% of African American men who were born between 1965 and 1969 would have been incarcerated at some point in their lifetime before 1999. 22.4%, that's almost 1 in 4, okay? But here's where it gets interesting. If we're talking about non-college men, non-college white men, for instance, so we're jumping down to the second part of the chart, 6% of non-college white men who were born within this time interval would have ended up by 1999 under lock and key, right? So that's double the general rate for white men. And we see for African American men, it goes up to 31.9. That's about 1 in 3. That's in my view, quite remarkable. This might be a little bit more difficult to see. It was a clearer slide, easier to view when I was looking at it earlier during preparation. But let me just give you the gist of this slide. So one thing I want to emphasize at an early stage in this talk is that when we're talking about people who are in jail and prison, we often talk about this as a racial problem, and it is a racial problem, right? About half the people who are in jail and prison are black and brown, half of that 2 million person total. But what I want to show you in this particular slide is that this problem is narrowly concentrated to a remarkable degree among the poor and among the uneducated, right? So if you look closely at this chart that I have in front of you, and this is the case for white men as it is for black men, although it's a much more acute problem among black men. But when you look at the far left, on the bottom table, you're talking specifically about black men with a high school diploma, without a high school diploma, excuse me. These are black men who have dropped out of high school. If you look at their incarceration rate between 1945 and 1949, about 17%. If you look at that same incarceration rate between, if they were born between 1945 and 1949. However, if they were born between 1965 and 1969, the same age cohort that I just mentioned, their rate of incarceration, if a high school dropout, 58.9%. That's more than half, right? So you're very likely to be incarcerated. And this statistic holds up today if you are a high school dropout and African American. But if you look closely at the far right, If you have some college, it's highly unlikely, even if you're African American, that you're going to end up spending any time in jail or prison, right? If you look at the white chart just above it, if you're white, the same rules apply. If you have some college, you're very unlikely to find yourself at any point in jail or prison. If you have no college, if you're a high school dropout, the chances of being incarcerated rise dramatically. So again, one thing I want to emphasize to you, this is a problem that is concentrated among minorities, but it's also concentrated among I don't want to say uneducated, but those without formal education in the African American and Hispanic communities. And that's an indication of class status. And it indicates this to not only be a race problem, but more precisely, a class problem. All right, let me launch my final poll. And for those of you who do not like polls, you'll have some relief after this final poll. One last question. How many people are under some form of carceral supervision today? Okay, so we talked about jail, we talked about prison, now we're talking about jail, prison, probation, and parole. Those are 4 different categories of carceral supervision. How many Americans are under some form of carceral supervision? Either jail, prison, probation, or parole. We already established that we have 2 million Americans, 2 million persons in America living under lock and key. Let's talk about the entire carceral population. I'll give you another few seconds to reply. All right, we're up to 25, almost 30 responses. Let's end the poll. So at this point, you all know that these numbers are large and relatively daunting. And so you went all the way up to 10 million. Not quite that many. We have around 7 million, 6 million, between 6 and 7 million Americans who are living under carceral supervision. And what I want to emphasize to you here is that we talk a lot about mass incarceration. Many of you are familiar with the term mass incarceration. What we don't realize that in many respects is that there are any number of other people who, while not living behind bars, are still being supervised in the criminal justice system. They're still checking with the probation officer. They still have restrictions on their movements in general society. And so you see that this probation number is larger than the combined number of those who are in jail, both jail and prison, right? So the entire sort of community under carceral supervision is quite large. It's about 2% of the US population. So it's a fairly large population that's subject to these very serious penal constraints. All right, we still have a few people entering, ready to get the gist of the presentation, because I'm turning now from giving you a background on punishment in the US to talk specifically about race and policing, race and police. So this is, many of us don't have, maybe some of us may have experience with the criminal justice system in terms of being subject to detention, but we all have experience with the police, and maybe not the younger people, but anyone who's been pulled over for a traffic ticket, you know what it's like to encounter a police officer, to speak with a police officer. And in our contemporary society, we know that that's nerve-wracking if you're a minority, right? We see the videos, we see people being subject to police violence. We wonder whether we might find ourselves under the same circumstances. So I think it is very important in talking about the state of criminal justice to talk specifically about police, right? And what precisely, how do we understand this relationship between being a minority, between having a specific racial identity and being subject to a police encounter, an interaction with a police officer. So I want to talk a little bit about, again, the relationship between race and policing, and then we'll talk about one idea, one discrete suggestion, a humble suggestion about how we might improve the situation of racial minorities generally, as they relate to, as we all relate to police officers, right? How can we improve our chances, let's say, of exiting a police encounter without being subject to police violence? And I think that that latter part of the presentation might be interesting to some of you. It might be counterintuitive. I'm sure I'll get a lot of questions, but I'm excited to share my sense of what the Black community in particular can do to improve our interactions with police and to make these interactions relatively safe. All right, so and Ashley, I'm just going to ask you to send me a message regarding time. Sometimes I lose track of the amount of time I have left, so if we need to initiate a countdown, please just let me know. All right, so with that, let's move on in the slide deck. So we talked a lot about mass incarceration, a lot of people locked up, a lot of people under supervision, carceral supervision, as I like to call it. But what does this tell us about criminal administration in the US? The entire system of criminal administration? Well, actually very little. If we think about the community of individuals who are living under lock and key, who are in jails and prisons, those individuals only arrived in prison as a function of being arrested. Those individuals the population of individuals who've been arrested, that population, each and every one of them was subject to a police stop, right? And of the population subject to a police stop, these individuals were subject to some form of police surveillance, right? Police officers observed them either directly or by way of camera. And so the point of this chart is to show you that incarceration, as vast as it might seem, and I should say carceral supervision, those 6 million individuals who are under carceral supervision, as big as that system might seem, that system is a subset of a larger set of practices in the penal system: arrests, stops, surveillance. And so we're talking about a fairly large system that encompasses the country and that we are all exposed to. And so policing in particular relates to these higher level actions by the state, higher level practices by the penal system, surveillance, stops, and arrests. Okay, so with that, let me push forward to talk more directly about the African American community as it relates to policing. And so we're all involved in this conversation about police violence, specifically against minorities. The videos are deeply disturbing. And one response that Black folks in particular have had to this issue of police violence is to develop what is now commonly known as the talk. I know that many of you have heard of the talk. It's a conversation that parents have with their children about how to interact with police. Right? There's been a lot of news coverage on the talk over the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years. And there was a conversation with a police officer, an African-American police officer, about how he talks to his kids about the talk, or more precisely, when he talks to his kids about the talk. And he said, I talked to my boys about the talk when I realized that they are no longer cute to white folks, to white people, right? So every parent has to decide, when do I talk to my son or daughter about how to interact with the police? It's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult conversation. But I'll have that conversation with my son probably at some point my son is 4, in the next 6 to 10 years. And I have to decide exactly what to advise him in the context of the talk. How is my son to interact with the police? How do I give him the best chance of exiting a police encounter unscathed, right? A very important conversation. So I want to talk to you about the talk in a way that's a bit counterintuitive. My objective here is to talk to you not about how we should talk to our kids about the talk, or even how our very young people, our early teens, should talk to and should engage with the police officers. They should do whatever the officer says, and obviously not cause any trouble. We don't want children, taking any risk in their encounters with police. But I want to talk about adults and how we should be interacting with the police in terms of any number of circumstances. And I'll get into this in a little bit more detail in a moment. But before I do, I want to show you this slide. Well, the slide actually relates to a video. If you can indulge me for a moment. I'm going to change my shared screen and show you a video about the talk specifically, right? So again, if we're talking about the talk, we're talking about a conversation that parents have with their kids about how to interact with police. So this is a clip taken from a platform online called The Cut. The Cut posts various documentaries about various topics. This particular documentary conveys parents talking to their real-life children about how to interact with the police. So this video, I'm not going to run the entire 5 minutes. Just it'll only take about 3 minutes to give you a sense of these interactions.
Dr. Gardner, did you also share the sound, your screen sound?
Okay, I did not. Let me try to figure out how to do that.
If you click the green button at the bottom that says share, there should be an option that says advanced sharing options.
Okay. I think I might need to stop it in order to make that happen. Share computer sound.
Yes.
Got it. All right, take 2. Is that working?
No, we still can't hear it.
Okay.
Is the volume on your computer turned up?
It is. I think, let me give this one more shot. Just do it. Did you hear that?
No, we can't hear it. It may be because you're connected with your Bluetooth to your computer. That might be the reason.
Okay. Let's see if we can. Okay, Ashley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ashley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I think we might need to just push forward and chalk this up to technical difficulties. What I'll do is I'll circulate the video to Ashley. I'll send her the link, and if you all are interested, it's a very good video. I highly recommend it. You can watch it at some point after after our session. Okay. So what I'll do is. Okay, Ashley, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so let's just move forward. I'll reload the PowerPoint. All right, apologies for that. Okay, so let me give you a little bit more background on police stops. In 2011, there were 35 million police stops in the US. 74% of them occurred in the traffic context. There's extensive data showing that police increasingly use traffic enforcement for purposes of drug enforcement, the war on drugs. And many of you know, if you don't know, I can tell you with little doubt that police focus intently on minorities in the context of the war on drugs, despite extensive sociological research showing that drug use is equal across races, that drug trafficking, in terms of rates of drug trafficking, they're relatively equal across races. So minorities get a lot of attention with respect to government drug enforcement programs, and these programs are often enforced in the traffic context, which it helps to explain the phenomenon of racial profiling in the traffic context. So what are we to make of this? Why is this particularly relevant to any of you? Well, a couple things. One, in terms of police homicides, we know that African Americans are twice as likely as Caucasians, and black people generally, twice as likely as Caucasians to be subject to a police homicide. We also know that if we want to talk not about homicides generally, but by police homicides generally, but police killings by way of tasers. So talking about that little device that police use to shock people to get them to relent in the context of a police encounter. African Americans at 12% of the US population, Black people at 12% of the US population, represent 48% of police killings by taser every year. Okay, so police encounters are for Black people. Let me jump to the slide that you're looking at right now. And this is a slide that explains a theory that in the academic literature called gateway theory. Gateway theory. What is gateway theory exactly? Okay, what is gateway theory exactly? It's a theory that the Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution, the Fourth Amendment is an amendment that protects us against arbitrary search and seizures by police. It's generally established that the police need some level of suspicion before stopping you. They must suspect something. They can't just pull you off the street for no reason and ask you questions without your consent. The Fourth Amendment, in terms of the way it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court, has changed in recent years. Over the last 30 years, what we call Fourth Amendment protections have effectively eroded, and it's much easier for police to pull you over without first establishing a legitimate suspicion than it would have been only a few decades ago, right? So we often refer to this as the erosion, the deterioration of the Fourth Amendment. It's easier for police to stop you now than it was 30 years ago. Much easier for them to racially profile, at least theoretically, than was the case 30 years ago. And there's a thought that this change in Fourth Amendment protections has resulted in what is often referred to as the de facto legalization of racial profiling. Well, that's a mouthful. What does that mean exactly? It means that there's very little recourse given the state of Supreme Court jurisprudence, Supreme Court opinions on the Fourth Amendment. There's very little recourse for minorities in particular to hold police accountable for being stopped arbitrarily, for being stopped without a proper basis, right? It's very difficult from a legal standpoint for us to sort of point this out and hold police accountable in our courts. What does that result in? That results in more stops. And if there are more stops, we might expect for there to be more instances in which Black folks are subject to police violence. So let me just walk us through this progression again slowly. We have a change in the law, which leads to what amounts to the legalization of racial profiling. It's not actually legal, but in terms of the way police operate, given that there's really not much recourse, it's effectively a legal practice. If you legalize racial profiling, you'd expect more. If you legalize racial profiling, you'd expect more stops of Black people. And if there are more stops of Black people, there are going to be more incidents of police violence against Black people, given that we have more contacts between police and Black folks, right? So this is the gateway theory of police violence. If you change the law such that it's been changed over the last 30 years, you're going to have a result at the end of a long process, the result of more incidents of police violence against African Americans. Okay, here's what I want to argue today in terms of one way in which minorities in general can sort of push back against this phenomenon. More stops, more incidents of police violence because of the higher number of stops in our society. So if you think about the talk, the central message of the talk, the central message we give to our children when talking to them about encounters with police is that they should do whatever the police officer asks them to do, right? Is that fair? We want them to exit the encounter unscathed. We want them to exit the encounter without being subject to police violence. Do whatever the police officer asks you to do, and then come home to me. That's what that video is going to show. Come home to me safely so that I don't have to worry that you're going to end up in some sort of friction, some sort of difficulty with an officer, right? My priority as a parent is to get my son home safely. But should we adopt the same practice as adults, right? When you think about your next police encounter, assuming that you're an adult, we want our kids to stay safe. We don't want them to take any risks in the context of an encounter with police. But should you take the exact same approach? And I want to argue that the answer to that question is no. No, you shouldn't take the exact same approach. Should you do everything the police officer tells you to do? Absolutely. Should you follow the police officer's instructions? Absolutely. But this idea that immediately after the encounter, we should go home and thank our lucky stars that we weren't subject to any form of violence. There's a problem with that notion, and I want to explain that problem to you in the next few moments, okay? So I want to pause it right now, that instead of simply doing whatever the officer tells you to do, going home, being happy that you weren't subject to any form of police violence, I want to submit that we need to come up with a protocol for police encounters that, in addition to advising individuals to follow police instructions, advises individuals, minority individuals in particular, to hold police accountable for racial profiling, okay, for misconduct in the context of an encounter. So how does this work? How does this theory, how do I prove up this theory? How do I prove up the idea that it's important not to simply run home forget about police misconduct when it happens? Well, first of all, if we're talking about conforming in the context of a police encounter, here's what happens, right? If we look at the center of this, I'm not going to go into this diagram in too great of detail, but if we think about compliance, total compliance, absolute compliance, it would work this way. You have the compliant minority actor, that's letter A. If you are entirely compliant, you do whatever the officer says, the officer, in terms of engaging in racial profiling or in terms of engaging in police misconduct, that comes at very, very low cost to the officer, right? The officer can engage in misconduct cheaply, on the cheap, if he knows that there are going to be no repercussions, if he knows that in addition to doing everything he says, that you're not going to do anything to hold him accountable for what just happened. And if this misconduct, if these illegal stops, if racial profiling happens on the cheap, happens cheaply, we'd expect more racial profiling, right? We'd expect more African-American stops, more stops of Black folks. And as a result of more stops of Black folks, we'd expect more incidents of police violence against African-Americans, because the higher the number of stops, the higher the number of incidents of police violence against African-Americans. Okay, I know you guys are hanging in there. I promise I'm wrapping up in the next 5 minutes. This is the model that I'm conveying to you, the non-conformity model. Again, this does not mean that you're disobeying anything that the police officer says. It does not mean you're being disrespectful. You're treating the officer with respect, excuse me. You're treating the officer, just to be clear, with total respect, but you're also taking a few additional steps to hold police officers accountable for problematic behavior, for misconduct, for pulling you over for no reason, if that's the case, for engaging in some form of misconduct in the context of the encounter. Here's how you do that. A few ideas. One, you need to be able to identify that officer, right? You need to have that officer's name. You need to have that officer's badge number or his or her license plate number. And you need to file a formal complaint using that identifying information, right? So getting the ID of the officer, submitting a formal complaint, getting the paperwork started, offering a report to the police institution of this officer's problematic behavior. What if all minorities followed this particular protocol, right? What if all minorities decided, look, I'm going to be respectful to the officer. I am going to pay attention to what's happening. I'm going to have a basic sense of my rights. And when the police officer does something wrong, I'm going to be sure that one, I have his information, and two, I'm going to report him afterward in a formal report to the police department. Here's what the effect of that alternative approach might have, right? As opposed to looking at letter F here, as opposed to having the compliant actor, here we have the non-compliant actor in terms of accountability. This is the actor who is intent on getting the police officer's information and filing a complaint after the encounter. If all of us did that, if all minorities engaged in that practice, we would have, I would argue, a lower rate of minority stops. Why? Because those stops will be more costly. Why would a stop be more costly if we all engaged in this accountability practice? Well, a few reasons. One, the officer at that point has to worry each time they stop a minority without justification. They have to worry that there's going to be some paperwork filed against them, that anytime a superior goes to their file, they're going to have an X number of complaints. It could harm their reputation. In terms of administrators in the police institution, they have to be concerned that it will harm the reputation of the police department. There's always a possibility that the media gets a hold of this information. If this is a department-wide practice, the media publicizes that information. Politicians get involved. There are any number of costs that, at least potentially, could unfold in the event that African Americans are routinely, that minorities are routinely getting the officer's information, filing these complaints, lodging these complaints inside the police institution. So as a result of that, again, higher costs to a race-based stop, higher costs to race-based profiling. If we have a higher cost associated with profiling, you would expect fewer stops of minority officers. So simple correlation here. You have a low cost incident of racial profiling that's going to result in higher level of stops, a higher number of stops. If you have a higher cost of racial profiling, you're going to have a lower number of African American stops. If we reduce the number of African American stops, we would expect that we would have fewer incidents in the context of these stops of police violence against African Americans, right? So this is a bit counterintuitive. We often think if we sit back, if we're entirely passive in relation to racial profiling, that we're less likely to be subject to police violence. But I want to offer that that's not necessarily the case, because when stops happen on the cheap because of a passive response by the minority subject, there are going to be more stops, more instances of police violence, and the reverse causal chain is put into play if we have a protocol that routinely holds police accountable for race-based stops. All right, so with that, I just want to offer one closing comment. I went a bit longer than I expected. We think about the talk, as we can see from the slide, as a prominent example of an African-American inclination to give absolute deference to police authority when subject to a race-based stop. That's what we want our kids to do. We don't want our kids to be engaging in these more sophisticated responses, because kids just don't have the maturity to take the approach that I just suggested. But when we're talking about adults, adults have the ability to take a slightly more sophisticated approach, one that elevates the cost of a stop. And I'm not talking about any stop. I'm talking about a stop that is based in racial profiling. And if we can elevate the cost of these stops of racial profiling, in my view, this could be a promising way to reduce the number of African American stops, minority stops, and as a result of that, potentially reduce the level of violence against minorities by police. So I want to end with a very brief parable that it's not a biblical parable, but it relates to Jesus's parable in Matthew about the seed, both the sowing and reaping of the seed. But this is also a parable that was offered by a pastor, but someone who participated prominently in the civil rights movement. And it's a parable about an old man who is planting a seed. And a younger person comes up to that man and says, all my life I've been eating from trees. This is what the younger person says. And you're not going to be able to eat from this tree that you're planting, right? You're putting the seed in the soil. You're an old man. The man was in his 80s. You're planting this seed. It was for a pecan tree, actually. So the younger person said, look, you're not going to live long enough to taste the fruit from that tree. Why are you planting the tree? And the old man paused and he said, son, all my life I've been eating from trees I did not plant, right? It's my job to plant this tree for someone else. And he said, just plant. There will be trees that you will never see grow, that someone else will eat from, and it's their responsibility to plant a tree for another. And I offer that parable simply to say that, the problems that I've outlined in the last several minutes are, they're deep problems. They're not problems that are going to be solved overnight. The problem of criminal justice in the US, specifically as it relates to minorities, it's a problem that we'll be wrestling with our entire lives, regardless of what age you are. And so if we're talking about solutions, if we're talking about how to change the criminal justice system, some of these changes may bring about immediate effects, immediate outcomes. But many of these changes, many of these actions that we take to change the criminal justice system, the fruits of that labor, right? The trees that we're planting, we may not even be able to eat from that fruit. But we want to continue to plant these trees. We want to continue to not only gather knowledge, but take concrete actions. Apart from police encounters, just simply, talking to our politicians, our police officers, our police departments, about how we can change the criminal justice system. Again, it's a generations-long struggle. I want to implore each of you to spend some time engaging in that struggle, because it's something that should be of interest to all of us as residents in this country, but specifically to our community, the minority community, who are likely to be subject at some point to the arbitrary and harmful nature of the criminal justice system. And certainly our kids are vulnerable to this system as well. So with that, again, after a presentation that ran a bit longer than I expected, I want to thank you for your time and attention. And I'm happy to take any and all questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. I do have the video. I can share it from my screen if you still want to show it.
I'd love for you if you could play from the beginning to minute 2:30.
Okay, wonderful.
We actually have a line that we do at our house. We practice this thing. What is it?
I'm Ariel Sky Williams. I'm 8 years old. I'm unarmed and I have nothing that will hurt you.
It's just kind of a thing we practice at our house. There are great police officers out there. There's also some police officers who are not so good.
And my fear is that you run across one of those bad ones.
For some reason, people of color have always been targeted by the police.
Before they became a policeman, and that person took all their ideas and all their thoughts and all their prejudice into their job.
Why would a police officer assume that you did something bad? Maybe because of my skin color.
I remember being put in handcuffs for something that had nothing to do with me. I was literally walking in the mall. Cops slammed me on the ground, busted my lip, chipped my tooth. That actually made me really mad.
How about the time they pulled us over with me in the car and arrested me and left all of you guys sitting in the car? Nobody knew how to drive on the side of the road because the bumper on the car was kind of hanging off.
No.
You know, we live in Puyallup. There's people that don't even have a bumper on their car.
My rear brake light wasn't working, and I got to my destination and they were working.
I was about your age, actually. They grabbed me.
Why?
I didn't know at the time. They just grabbed me. They threw me onto the police car.
I got tased that time. That time they tased me because they said I wasn't complying.
Ariel, are you okay?
What's wrong, baby? I'm okay, I'm alive, all right? Every day I get to see you, I get to do this, right? All right, come on, let's calm down, let's finish this, all right? You good? Hey, you're making me cry. Come on.
You have to be careful when you're out there in this world because this world's not going to always be honest or fair to you. I know, Sean, you got a little bit lighter than the rest of them, so it's a possibility you won't get stopped.
Sound like you just pulled him over.
Okay. Okay. Is that where you wanted me to stop?
You know what? You could just Okay, let's just stop there. I think folks have gotten the gist.
Okay. So we do have some questions in the chat box. Our first question says, what if the officer refuses to give you the information?
So a couple things. One, if the officer refuses to give you the information, you still might be able to see that officer's license plate. You could also go to the police department, file a report, give on the form a sense of where you were at the time you were pulled over and a description of the physical characteristics of the officer. Based on that information, his or her superiors might be able to identify the specific person that pulled you over. I will say that even if that doesn't happen, the mere request, a polite, respectful request for the officer's information, that is enough to convey to the officer that you intend to hold them accountable, okay? And so if we're talking about accountability, if we're talking about attaching a cost to a race-based stop, the mere request for that officer's information suggests that this stop might be more costly than the officer expected, and might come with repercussions. Now, can't underscore enough, you know, officers, many of them have a very difficult job. I don't mean to, suggest that these individuals should be either harassed or disrespected. I'm only saying for the ones that are engaged in misconduct, a message needs to be sent that there's a cost for engaging in misconduct. The idea that the officer can engage in misconduct and there are no repercussions, I'm simply going to go home and no one will hear anything more about it. In my view, that's not the way to counteract this problem of racial profiling and police misconduct against minorities.
Okay, our second question says, in the non-conformity model, is video recording of the incident another tool to use?
I think that's an excellent idea. And thanks for the suggestion. So there are, if you're interested, there are cameras that you can get and put on your dashboard to record traffic in front of you. I mean, essentially they're put on the dashboard to record police encounters. They cost about $30. You might think of it as analogous to the body cam that police officers wear. As soon as you're pulled over, you press the button, it records the encounter. It might be easier that way because the video itself picks up the officer's license plate number, presumably gets the officer on camera. You have an entire recording of the encounter. Not only is it your word, you have this video evidence to support your account, right? $30, fairly cheap. Another way to go about holding officers accountable for problematic behavior. I will say that while some of us might be inclined to sort of take up this cause, to take this particular approach, the non-conformity model, things like cameras on the dash are in regular use in neighborhoods and particular areas in which this sort of behavior is rampant from police, right? So I think it's a very good option, one that I would strongly encourage, one that I think helps with this project of accountability, police accountability.
Wonderful. We have a question that says, is there any data as to what % of minorities profiled, stopped, incarcerated, etc., are actually guilty?
There is good data on this particular question. So if we think about this in terms of hit rates, and what is a hit? Well, a hit is as an instance in which a minority stop or any stop, let's say, results in the discovery of criminal behavior, right? So if we think about a stop as a police detention, an incident in which an individual is detained by police against their will, and we think about a hit as an instance in which the police officer actually discovers criminal activity as a result of a stop, we can look at the correspondence between stops and hits to see whether whether the police are actually engaging in effective stop techniques or effective stop practices. And what you often see, or what you generally see, is that the hit rate for minorities is much lower than it is for whites, right? So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but one statistic I talked about recently in one of my classes is that in urban communities in particular, in urban minority communities, one study found that the hit rate is 1 in every 45 stops, right? So in every 45 stops of minorities, and these are stops outside of the traffic context. These are stops on the street in the context of what is often called stop and frisk. For every 45 stops, you'll get 1 hit. So one instance in which a minority actually has a gun on them, drugs on them, etc. Right? So you have to ask the question: does that ratio sound like effective, like an indicator of effective policing? For every 45 minority individuals in the urban setting stop, they get 1 hit, right? They discover narcotics on 1 person. Does that sound like effective policing? Is all the harassment faced by the other 44, not the 1, but the 44? The fact that they were all stopped and the police found nothing. Is that worth the discovery of the contraband on the 1? I would argue no.
We have another question that sort of deals with that same subject. It says, how can we differentiate between a legitimate stop by the police and one that is a result of racial profiling?
Very good question. Also a difficult question, in part because the traffic code is voluminous, right? What do I mean by that? There are so many traffic laws that criminal defense attorneys argue that police can pull you over police can find a reason to pull over virtually anyone, right? We're all, as the theory goes, in violation of some aspect of the traffic code because there are so many reasons that officers can pull you over. However, if an officer pulls you over and says that you have a broken taillight, you get home and your taillight, and you know for a fact that your taillight isn't broken, or he says your taillight is out, you know for a fact that it is not, excuse me. You know, that's a clear example, an easy example that profiling may have occurred. When will you be absolutely sure that you are profiled? You know, that's something that's going to be difficult to establish, absolute certainty as to profiling. Much of this falls in the category of, you know, suspicion, a belief on some level that you are profiled, and you should feel free to, if you feel strongly about it, you should feel free to articulate your degree of certainty in the form that you fill out if you are inclined to fill out a complaint. But you know, one good example is one in which, you know, you're thinking about a neighborhood setting or a particular area near either where you live or work, and you are regularly being pulled over, right? I mean, if you think about the example, I'm not sure if any of you know the example of Philandro Castile in Minneapolis, but he had been pulled over, I want to say 50 times. He's a young African-American individual in his, he was a young African-American individual in his 20s. He had been pulled over something like 50, 60 times in the span of 2 years, right? There's a certain pattern to this behavior in particular areas that's easily identifiable, even if the officer has a valid reason to stop you once or twice. If it seems to be happening again and again and again, you know that it amounts to something more than a legitimate traffic stop. You know, similar to that, there's a difference between stopping you for a traffic violation, which might be entirely legitimate, and searching your car, right? So an officer can pull you over legitimately for a traffic violation. They can ask you if they can search your car, and you can say no, right? They're asking for consent. You can refuse to give them consent. If they search the car anyway, that's a violation. That's generally a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. That would be, in my estimation, the proper basis for filing a complaint. If the officer searches your car without asking you for permission, and he had no reason to do so, that would qualify as a Fourth Amendment violation. That is another reason to file a complaint. So we're talking about something that would amount to harassment in the context of traffic enforcement. Stopping minorities periodically. If you're stopped several times in the same area, you might suspect that something's going on. If the officer stops you and he has no explanation, you might suspect that you're being profiled. If the officer tries to search your car without any justification, you might suspect under that circumstance that you're being profiled. So these are a few concrete examples of circumstances in which officers are profiling and in which you might, I think, justifiably be prompted to file a formal complaint with the police department.
We have one more question in the chat. If anyone has any more questions, again, you can go ahead and type them in and send them, and we'll address them. So the question that we have here says, I believe a very important aspect of the talk should be actually preventative, in addition to how police behave when the law is broken. What do you think?
So I think I glanced at that question in the chat, and preventative, I guess we'd have to talk a bit more about what we mean by preventative. Certainly, you know, we want everyone to behave in a way that doesn't draw legitimate police attention, right? I mean, of course, I'm going to stand here and say that no one should be acting in a way that triggers criminal suspicion and legitimate police attention. And to the extent that someone is engaging in criminal behavior and that draws the police officers, that draws police attention, you know, that individual is not acting in a preventative fashion. But the question, as it relates to my proposal, I don't think allows for preventative behavior. I mean, if there are preventative ideas, I'm happy to hear them. But I'm talking about circumstances in which people are acting, behaving innocently, yet are being subject to police scrutiny, police investigation, criminal investigation. The police suspect them for no reason other than their phenotype, right? How they appear to the police officer in terms of their physical characteristics. But I'm happy to hear about sort of preventative activity that I might be missing. But the circumstances that I'm talking about are those in which individuals are engaged in innocent behavior, yet are being scrutinized by police and subject to police investigation without having given rise to legitimate police suspicion.
We have another question that just popped up that says, what role do you see for the church in standing up against police violence for the rights of Black people and for the rights of Black people?
I think the church can take a significant role. I think the church could, for example, the GC, for example, could engage in a program of reaching out to police departments and talking to them specifically about racial profiling, about implicit bias, and beginning to, for example, setting up conversations between police and minority communities on the subject of racial bias, racial profiling, and improving police community relations. It could be that police officers, police departments are more open to that sort of conversation when a religious institution is taking the lead, as opposed to someone like myself, who is very critical of police departments. I spend most of my time criticizing policing. They're not going to be all that anxious to talk to me. However, religious institutions have a degree of credibility that I think can be very helpful in addressing some of these issues. I think the problem with the church is that the church is inclined to, at least ostensibly, take a hands-off approach to politics. And in relation to that, they're quick to situate police violence as a political issue. It's not a political issue, it's a humanitarian issue. In the same way that we feel as though, feeding individuals in developing countries who lack nourishment is a human rights issue. Being free from government violence is also a human rights issue. And if we can frame this issue in humanitarian terms, as opposed to taking a cop-out and categorizing the issue of police violence as being a political issue, then we are in a much better cultural position to address police violence as a church community. And I'll also argue to address the problem of incarceration as a humanitarian issue. I think we can address these issues squarely as a religious community if we refrain from dismissing them as politics, because it's so much more than just politics.
Wonderful. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I have one question before I hand over to Pastor. So what can we do on an individual level to advocate for those that are victims of mass incarceration or police brutality, or whose families have been victims?
Yeah, let me just address, that's a great question. And we could have an entirely different session on in answering that question. But I want to speak for a moment about people who are incarcerated. Often those people are heavily stigmatized. They're released from prison, released from jail. They have an arrest record. They have a conviction on their record. Not only are they discriminated against in the employment context, they're also barred from any number of government benefits, including tuition assistance for college, food assistance, housing assistance. You're really, as a minority individual who's already subject to discrimination in the employment context, you really come out of a prison facility, a jail facility, as someone who is going to have a difficult time finding stability in life. I think just on a personal level, if we can, when we think about discrimination in our society, and inequality in our society, we often think about what they call immutable characteristics like race, sex, meaning gender, male, females, women being discriminated against. We need to start thinking a little bit more about righteous discrimination against people who have criminal records and have experience in the criminal justice system. How are we, especially as a Christian community, going to integrate them back into society, help them with getting jobs, try to reduce the stigma of incarceration and involvement in the criminal justice system? To what extent are we willing to reach out, both from a moral standpoint, but also from a material standpoint, to integrate those individuals back into society? So just being cognizant on an immediate level, on a personal level, about the discrimination faced by those who quite frankly may have made a very big mistake in their lives. If we can be cognizant of their need to reintegrate I think that can go a long way. And I think as Christians, that's the very, very least we can do is, take the approach that Jesus would have to these individuals who have been caught up in this system.
Wonderful. So we just want to thank you so much for taking this time to educate us on this topic this afternoon. It was wonderful. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that, I learned a lot, and I think we're all much more informed and ready to go out into the world and advocate on behalf of those who do not have a voice. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Pastor so that he can close up for us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gardner. I appreciate your taking the time to share your expertise with us in our church this evening. I have one lingering thought, and that has to do with what we have heard about over time and what we probably have witnessed in every case, in most cases, of Black men being killed and the judicial system not coming through with what we perceive to be the proper verdict. So with respect to complaints and filing complaints, what do you think will happen when these complaints hit what we seem to feel is a police club, a police firewall, so to speak? Would that matter anyway? When you think of the reality of what we have not been able to get in terms of justice done in the jurisprudence system. Talk a little bit about that for me before we say goodbye.
Okay. So certainly not a silver bullet. I don't mean to suggest that this protocol, right? The systematic filing of complaints by minorities is guaranteed to bring the relief that we seek. But I'll say a couple things. There's a difference between these transactions, these incidents of racial profiling, having some cost and having no cost, right? And I think the benefit to this approach is that it at the very least, it sends a message to the officer that the behavior is intolerable, right? If you ask the officer for his identification, indicating to the officer that you intend to hold him accountable for problematic behavior, assuming the behavior is problematic, because there are any number of, I've been pulled over for very good reasons, any number of times in the traffic context. But the point here is that there's the sending of the message merely by asking the officer for his identification, or taking the officer's badge number, taking the license plate number, and then there's the possibility that filing a complaint, along with all of the other minority folk out there who are subject to similar treatment, collectively filing complaints, that there's going to be paperwork there, all right? And it's a question of whether that paperwork is, whether there's a response to that paperwork in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, but it's there. And as long as it's there, there's at least the potential for someone to act on that paperwork, either in a small sense or in a large sense. And so again, I go back to the question of relative costs. And I think what we don't want to do is leave it to the politicians, leave it to police administrators, leave it to judges to apply the costs. We have, as individuals, the ability to raise the cost of these race-based police stops on our own as a community through specific protocols, right? This is a grassroots attempt at change, and simply by assigning a cost to problematic race-based stops. So I think you're right to point out that there are no guarantees here, but it's better to. I think it's a step forward, and the passive approach, I want to argue first and foremost, is not going to bring us the results that we're hoping for ultimately.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. And I think one of the points has been helpful, might have been helpful to a number of people tonight. I learned this some years ago, but certainly didn't know it many, many years ago, that I can refuse to have the police search my car. And that's very instructive. I don't know how many people are aware of that, or how many people have the on-the-spot courage to say no to an officer. And that's also a halo effect. Yeah,
absolutely. The same phenomenon, right? Officer feels as though he can sort of coerce you into allowing him to search the car. Oh, you don't mind if I search your car, do you? And the expectations, you say, no, please go ahead. There's a systematic response. No, you cannot search my car. That resets the norms of interaction between minorities and the police. Because police often feel as though they can just sort of run over you with these requests. So I don't want to go, I don't mean to jump back into the thick of things, but I do want to emphasize to folks, if an officer asks you whether you can search the car, either in a polite way or in a way that suggests that you don't have the ability to say no, you do have the ability to say no. Now, if they insist on searching the car and say, it doesn't matter, I don't care how you respond, I'm still searching the car, then you let them do that and you file the complaint. But you do not have to consent to the search. And they are much more likely to make this request of minorities than they are Caucasians.
Yeah, and they should be giving you an outlier as to reasonable suspicion.
To be clear, they don't have to articulate to you in the moment, right? They should have reasonable suspicion before searching your vehicle without your consent. But they don't necessarily have to share that with you in the moment.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I'm going to ask again that we send up a little clap of hand or thumbs up for Dr. Gardner, if you feel thus inclined.